Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People story. Have you ever heard that backup beep from heavy machinery and realized it was coming from behind your house? I followed the sound and found an excavator destroying my rose garden, and the HOA president casually told the workers to keep going. I hit record, and he immediately changed his tone. The beeping hit me before I even got out of my car. You know that sound, the warning beep heavy machinery makes when it backs up, except it was coming from behind my house where no heavy machinery had any business being. I'd been gone for 3 days on a work trip, one of those mandatory training things that nobody wants to attend but everyone has to. All I wanted was to get inside, crack open a beer, and forget about PowerPoint presentations for the weekend. Instead, I was standing in my driveway listening to what sounded like a construction zone in my backyard. My property sits on about 2 acres of what used to be farmland, built back in the 1960s when this whole area was still rural. Over the years, developers bought up the surrounding land and built a subdivision they called Sunset Ridge Estates. Fancy name for cookie-cutter houses with tiny yards, but whatever. The important thing is that my property was here first, and when they developed around me, my deed specifically states that I'm not subject to any homeowners association covenants or restrictions. I walked around to the back of my house and couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was a mini excavator sitting in what used to be my prize rose garden, and a trench about 6 feet deep and 20 feet long running right along where my property line meets my neighbor's yard. My neighbor being the HOA president, a guy who moved in about 2 years ago and immediately made it his mission to turn the neighborhood into his personal kingdom. 2 workers in hard hats were standing near the excavator, looking at some kind of map spread across the hood of their truck. They seemed friendly enough, just doing their job, but they looked confused when they saw me approaching. "Excuse me," I called out, keeping my voice level. "What's going on here?" The older of the 2 workers looked up from the map. "You live here?" "Yeah, this is my property. What are you digging up my yard for?" The workers exchanged glances. "We got a work order to dig the foundation for a pool. According to this site map, this is where the property line is." He showed me the paper and I could see someone had drawn a line that put my rose garden and about 15 feet of my backyard on my neighbor's property. "That's not right," I told them. "That line is way off. This is all my land." That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "There you are. I was wondering when you'd get back." It was my neighbor, the HOA president. He was wearing one of those golf polos with the subdivision logo embroidered on it, like he was the mayor of his own little town. His name was Bill something, and from day one he'd acted like he owned the entire neighborhood. "Bill, what the hell is this?" I gestured toward the excavator and the destroyed rose bushes that had taken me 5 years to cultivate. He walked over with this casual confidence, like he was doing me a favor. "The board approved the pool expansion last Tuesday. You should have gotten the email notification." "What email? I'm not in your HOA." Bill laughed like I just told him the earth was flat. "Everything on this block is part of the association. Don't be difficult about this. We're actually doing you a favor by cleaning up that eyesore of a garden. The new landscaping plan will increase both our property values." I felt that familiar heat rising in my chest, the kind that makes you want to start yelling. But I've learned over the years that yelling rarely gets you what you want. Instead, I turned back to the workers. "I need to see your permit for this excavation." The younger worker looked at Bill. "He says he's got all the permits handled." Bill stepped between us. "I am the HOA president. The board has full authority over neighborhood improvements. You don't need to worry about permits." "Actually, I do, because this is my property and you're trespassing." "Look," Bill said, his voice getting that condescending edge that probably worked on other people in the subdivision. "I understand you're not used to how things work in a proper community, but we have rules here. Standards. The infinity pool design requires us to extend the foundation into this area for the proper water flow. It's for the good of the entire community." The workers looked uncomfortable. The older one cleared his throat. "Maybe we should call the office and verify the property boundaries." "No need," Bill said quickly. "I surveyed it myself. Everything's approved." That's when I knew he was lying. Nobody surveys their own property for a major construction project. I told the workers to shut down the equipment while we sorted this out, and Bill immediately countered by telling them to keep working, that he'd handle the neighbor situation. I realized this wasn't going to be resolved with a friendly conversation. I went inside and grabbed my phone, then came back out and started recording. "For the record," I said clearly, "I am the owner of this property, and I am telling you that you do not have permission to excavate on my land. You are trespassing." Bill got red in the face. You can't just record people without permission. Actually, I can. This is my property. While I was recording, I called the non-emergency police line and the county building inspector's office. The police said they'd send someone out, and the building inspector said they'd be there within an hour to verify permits. Bill was getting increasingly agitated. He kept telling the workers to continue, while I stood there with my phone recording everything. Finally, I went to my garage and dragged out a lawn chair and a cooler, set them up right in the path where the excavator would need to go next. "What are you doing?" Bill demanded. "Sitting on my property." The workers had stopped digging at this point. They weren't stupid. They could see this was turning into a legal issue, and they didn't want to be in the middle of it. The building inspector arrived first, a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd seen every kind of construction dispute imaginable. She introduced herself and asked to see the permits. Bill pulled out a folder. "Here's the board approval for the pool project." She looked at the papers and shook her head. "This is just an HOA approval. Where's your city building permit?" "We don't need a city permit. The HOA has full authority over property improvements." "Sir, you absolutely need a city permit for any excavation over 2 feet deep. You also need utility markings, soil analysis, and approval from the county for any work this close to a property line." I went inside and got my original land survey and property deed. When I showed them to the inspector, she compared them to the site map the workers had been using. "This map is completely wrong," she said. "According to the official survey, this entire excavation is on the wrong property." Bill tried to argue with her, claiming that property lines shift over time and that the original survey was outdated. The inspector explained patiently that property lines don't just shift, and that any boundary dispute would need to be resolved through proper legal channels, not by digging up someone's yard. Then Bill tried a different approach. He pulled the inspector aside and started talking quietly, gesturing toward his house and mentioning something about supporting local contractors and being reasonable about minor paperwork issues. That backfired spectacularly. The inspector's expression went from professional patience to barely controlled anger. She walked back over to where I was standing and announced loudly that she was issuing a stop work order and that the property owner would be receiving citations for unpermitted excavation, failure to mark utilities, and violation of setback requirements. "How much are the fines?" I asked. "Starts at $5,000 for unpermitted excavation, goes up from there depending on what else we find." Bill's face went pale. He started arguing that there must be some mistake, that he was a respected member of the community, that surely they could work something out. The police officer arrived while Bill was still trying to negotiate his way out of the citations. After taking statements from everyone involved, the officer confirmed that what had happened constituted criminal trespassing and property damage. By now, several of the neighbors had gathered to watch the show. Word spreads fast in subdivisions, especially when there's an excavator and police cars involved. I could see people taking pictures and talking among themselves. After the inspector and police officer left, I was standing in my backyard looking at the destruction. My rose garden was completely destroyed. There was a 6-foot deep trench cutting across what used to be my lawn. The excavator had torn up about a 1/4 acre of grass and landscaping that I'd spent years establishing. Bill approached me one more time as the workers were loading their equipment. "Look, we can work this out between neighbors. I'll pay to replace the roses. Maybe we can even work out a deal where you let me finish the pool and I'll give you access to it." I looked at him for a long moment. "Bill, you just trespassed on my property, destroyed my landscaping, and tried to steal 15 feet of my land, and now you want to negotiate?" "I'm trying to be reasonable here." "No, you're trying to avoid the consequences of what you did." That night, I called my attorney. He was a guy I'd used for real estate transactions before, and he knew property law inside and out. When I explained what had happened, he was quiet for a minute. "Do you have documentation of everything?" he asked. "Pictures, video, police report, building inspector's report, everything." "Good. This is going to be expensive for him." The next morning, I walked around my property with a professional landscaper to assess the damage. It wasn't just the roses. The excavator had damaged the root systems of 2 mature oak trees. The trench had cut through my irrigation system. There were tire tracks across my lawn where they'd driven the heavy equipment. The landscaper estimated that a full restoration would cost about $15,000. But that was just to restore it to what it had been before. Since this was clearly going to end up in court, my attorney suggested documenting what a premium restoration would cost. The premium restoration estimate came in at $25,000. That included replacing the destroyed roses with mature plants, upgrading the irrigation system, adding drainage to prevent future water issues, and bringing in premium topsoil to repair the damaged areas. My attorney sent Bill a demand letter: pay the $25,000 in restoration costs within 30 days, or face a lawsuit for trespassing, property damage, and intentional interference with property rights. Bill's response came through his own attorney. They offered $5,000 to resolve this neighborly dispute amicably. We countered with $30,000. The extra $5,000 was for my attorney fees and the hassle of dealing with this mess. Meanwhile, word was spreading through the subdivision about what had happened. I started getting visits from other neighbors who were suddenly very interested in their own property lines. Turns out several people had questions about projects the HOA had approved that seemed to encroach on their land. One neighbor showed me an HOA notice he'd received about removing a fence that was supposedly 6 inches over the property line onto common area. When he measured it himself, the fence was actually 2 feet inside his property line, and the common area they wanted him to stay out of was land he'd been paying property taxes on for 8 years. Another neighbor had been forced to move her garden shed because the HOA claimed it violated setback requirements. When she looked at the actual city codes, the shed was completely legal where it was, but moving it to where the HOA demanded would violate the actual setback requirements. I started to realize that Bill hadn't just made a mistake with my property line. He'd been systematically redrawing boundaries throughout the subdivision to grab land for HOA projects and to control what people could do with their own property. 3 weeks after the excavation incident, I was sitting on my porch when I saw Bill loading boxes into his car. His wife came out carrying more boxes, and neither of them looked happy. My next-door neighbor on the other side came over to fill me in on what had happened. Bill had been trying to get a loan to pay for the pool construction and the legal cost from my case. When the bank ran a title search on his property, they discovered that his property deed was encumbered by my attorney's lien for the restoration costs. On top of that, the county had red-flagged his property for all the unpermitted excavation. He couldn't get a certificate of occupancy for any future construction, and he couldn't sell the house without resolving the violations. The HOA board had called an emergency meeting and voted to remove Bill as president. Apparently, once the other board members found out he'd been making decisions without consulting them and potentially exposing the HOA to lawsuits, they decided he was more liability than asset. The muddy hole where he'd planned to build his infinity pool sat there for 2 more weeks, slowly filling with rainwater and becoming a breeding ground for mosquitoes. The HOA finally hired contractors to fill it in and restore the area to grass, but that came out of the association's reserve fund, which meant everyone's dues were going up to cover it. Bill ended up having to sell his house at a loss to pay off the legal costs and restoration fees. The buyers were a young couple with 2 kids who introduced themselves the day they moved in and apologized for the previous owner's behavior. My yard took about 3 months to fully recover from the restoration work. The new irrigation system was actually better than what I'd had before, and the mature rose bushes the landscaper brought in were spectacular. By summer, it looked better than it ever had. The best part was the letter I received from the new HOA board. They wanted to formally apologize for the previous president's actions and assure me that the association had no intention of interfering with my property in any way. They also mentioned that they were conducting a comprehensive review of all previous board decisions to ensure they were legally sound. Sitting on my porch now, looking out at my restored garden and watching the new neighbors' kids play in their yard, I can't help but think about how different things could have gone if Bill had just knocked on my door before he started digging. A simple conversation could have saved him about $50,000 and a lot of humiliation. But some people don't learn until they face real consequences, and sometimes when someone tries to steal your land and destroy your property, the best response is to make sure those consequences are as expensive and public as possible. The excavation incident happened 6 months ago, and I still get neighbors stopping by to thank me for standing up to Bill. Turns out a lot of people in the subdivision had been intimidated by his authoritarian approach to running the HOA, but nobody wanted to be the first to challenge him. Now, the HOA operates more like what it was supposed to be, a community organization that maintains common areas and handles basic neighborhood issues, rather than Bill's personal fiefdom. Property values have actually gone up since he left, probably because buyers aren't worried about dealing with a tyrant HOA president anymore. I learned a lot from this experience. First, always know exactly where your property lines are and keep your documentation current. Second, when someone tries to intimidate you with fake authority, the best response is usually to demand they prove they actually have that authority. Third, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is just sit quietly on your own property and let someone else make all the mistakes. But the most important lesson was about community. When one person abuses their position to push people around, it affects everyone. Standing up to that kind of behavior doesn't just protect your own rights, it protects everyone else who might be too afraid or too unsure to fight back on their own. The new HOA president is a retired accountant who actually reads the bylaws before making decisions and sends out detailed meeting minutes so everyone knows what's being discussed. Board meetings went from Bill's one-man shows to actual discussions where residents can ask questions and voice concerns. Last month, the HOA voted to install new playground equipment in the common area. Instead of Bill just deciding what he thought was best, they surveyed all the families with children and held a community meeting to look at different options. The whole process took longer than Bill's dictatorial approach would have, but everyone was happy with the final decision because they'd had input. I've been thinking about joining the board myself, not because I want power over my neighbors, but because I understand now how important it is to have people involved who actually care about the community rather than just their own agenda. The hole in Bill's former backyard is gone now, replaced by a nice lawn where the new owners have set up a swing set. Sometimes I see their kids playing out there and remember the muddy pit that used to be there, and I think about how much trouble could have been avoided if Bill had just acted like a reasonable human being instead of a petty dictator. But then again, if he'd been reasonable, I wouldn't have learned so much about property law, community dynamics, and the importance of standing up for yourself when someone tries to walk all over you. So maybe, in a weird way, I should thank him for the education. I'm writing this story because I want other people to know that you don't have to let HOAs or anyone else push you around even when they act like they have absolute authority. Most of the time, when someone is being unreasonably aggressive about exercising their power, it's because they don't actually have as much power as they're pretending to have. Do your research, know your rights, document everything, and don't be afraid to call in professionals when someone is clearly overstepping their bounds. It might cost some money up front, but it's usually worth it to establish clear boundaries and make sure people understand that you're not going to be intimidated. The excavator tracks in my yard have long since grown over, but I kept one photo from that day. Bill standing next to the excavator in his HOA president polo, pointing at his fake property map while the building inspector shakes her head in the background. I have it in a frame on my desk as a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is just letting someone reveal exactly who they are when they think they can get away with anything. What I haven't mentioned yet is how deep this whole thing went. About 2 months after Bill moved out, I got a call from my attorney. Apparently, Bill's legal troubles were just getting started. The county had decided to do a full audit of all the construction projects that had been approved during Bill's time as HOA president. When they started digging into the records, they found a pattern of boundary issues, unpermitted work, and what appeared to be systematic violations of city codes. Remember that fancy entrance gate the HOA had installed last year? The one Bill was so proud of because it made the subdivision look more upscale? Turns out it was built partially on city property without any kind of easement or permission. The city wanted it moved, or they were going to remove it themselves and bill the HOA for the costs. The landscaping project that had added those decorative stone walls along the main road, 3 of them were built on private property belonging to residents who hadn't given permission. Bill had just assumed that since he was HOA president, he could approve work on any property within the subdivision boundaries. But the biggest discovery came when they audited the HOA's finances. Bill had been approving payments to a landscaping company owned by his brother-in-law, and the invoices didn't match the work that had actually been done. Over 2 years, the HOA had paid about $40,000 for services that were either never performed or were significantly overpriced. My neighbor filled me in on what happened at the emergency board meeting where all this came to light. Apparently, several residents stood up and shared their own stories about Bill's overreach. One couple had been forced to remove a vegetable garden from their backyard because Bill claimed it violated the aesthetic standards of the community. When they researched it after he left, they found out there was nothing in the actual HOA covenants about vegetable gardens. Another resident had been told he couldn't park his work truck in his own driveway because commercial vehicles weren't allowed. The actual covenant said commercial vehicles over a certain weight limit weren't allowed, and his truck was well under that limit. But Bill had been threatening him with fines for months. The pattern was clear. Bill had been making up rules and interpreting the covenants in whatever way gave him the most control over his neighbors, and because most people don't want to spend their free time fighting with the HOA, they'd just gone along with his demands. The financial irregularities triggered an investigation by the state attorney general's office. HOAs that misuse funds can face serious legal consequences, and individual board members can be held personally liable for financial misconduct. I found out about this when 2 investigators showed up at my door asking questions about my interactions with Bill and the HOA. They wanted to know if I'd ever been pressured to pay assessments or fees, and whether anyone had ever claimed I was subject to HOA authority. During that interview, I learned something interesting. The original developer of Sunset Ridge Estates had actually intended for my property to remain independent. There was correspondence in the planning file specifically noting that the existing farmhouse and surrounding acreage would not be included in the HOA structure. Bill had apparently found these documents when he became president, but instead of respecting the original intent, he'd decided to try to bring my property under HOA control anyway. His fake property map wasn't just a mistake, it was part of a deliberate plan to expand the HOA's territory and his own authority. The investigators asked if I wanted to file additional charges against Bill for fraud and conspiracy. After talking it over with my attorney, we decided the civil lawsuit was sufficient. Bill was already facing potential criminal charges related to the financial misconduct, and frankly, I just wanted to put the whole thing behind me. But the story gets even more interesting. About 3 months after the investigation started, I got a knock on my door from a woman I'd never met. She introduced herself as Bill's ex-wife and asked if we could talk. She'd been divorced from Bill for about 5 years, but they'd stayed in contact because of their kids. She told me that Bill's behavior during his time as HOA president was part of a larger pattern that had ultimately destroyed their marriage. According to her, Bill had always been controlling and had difficulty accepting that other people had rights he couldn't override. When they were married, he'd tried to control everything from how she decorated their house to which friends she was allowed to have. The HOA presidency had just given him a broader platform for the same behavior. She wanted to apologize for what he'd done to me and to thank me for standing up to him. She said that seeing him face real consequences for his actions had been validating for her because during their marriage she'd often felt like she was crazy for thinking his behavior was unreasonable. She also had some information that explained a lot about why Bill had been so aggressive about the pool project. Apparently, he'd been bragging to his coworkers about the infinity pool he was planning, and he'd promised to host a big company barbecue once it was finished. When the original pool design wouldn't fit on his property, instead of scaling back his plans, he'd just decided to take some of mine. The hubris of it still amazes me. He'd been so confident that he could intimidate me into going along with his plan that he'd started construction without even trying to negotiate. He'd just assumed that his position as HOA president gave him the authority to redraw property lines whenever it was convenient for him. His ex-wife also told me that Bill had been talking about running for city council, with the idea that he could eventually become mayor. The pool project was supposed to be a showcase of his leadership skills and his ability to get things done. Instead, it became evidence of his complete disregard for other people's rights and his willingness to break the law when it suited his purposes. The financial investigation concluded about 6 months later. The state found evidence of misappropriation of HOA funds and imposed a significant fine on the association. Bill was personally liable for the missing money, and the HOA was required to implement new oversight procedures to prevent future misconduct. The HOA had to hire a property management company to handle day-to-day operations while the new board got trained on their legal responsibilities. The management company's first task was to review all of Bill's decisions and figure out which ones needed to be reversed or corrected. That process took almost a year. The gate had to be moved at a cost of about $15,000. Several landscape features had to be relocated or removed. 3 families received settlements for work that had been done on their property without permission. The total cost of cleaning up Bill's mistakes came to just over $100,000. The HOA had to take out a loan to cover the expenses, which meant everyone's dues doubled for the next 5 years. Some residents were understandably angry about having to pay for Bill's misconduct. There was talk of individual lawsuits against him to recover the money, but his bankruptcy filing made that pointless. He'd lost his house, his savings, and his job, and there wasn't anything left to recover. The new board decided to focus on moving forward rather than trying to squeeze blood from a stone. They used the crisis as an opportunity to completely overhaul how the HOA operated, with new transparency requirements, regular financial audits, and term limits for board members. They also established a resident advocacy position, basically an ombudsman who handles complaints about HOA decisions and makes sure residents understand their rights. It's a volunteer position that rotates annually, and interestingly enough, they asked if I'd be willing to serve the first term. I declined, partly because I didn't want that level of involvement in HOA politics, but mostly because I thought it would be better for someone who actually lived in the subdivision to handle resident issues. But I did agree to be an advisor and to help train future advocates about property rights and legal procedures. The whole experience taught me a lot about how small-scale corruption works. Bill wasn't stealing money for personal luxury. At least not primarily. He was using his position to implement his vision of what the community should look like, and he was willing to bend or break rules to make that happen. In his mind, he probably justified everything as being for the greater good. The landscaping improvements made the neighborhood look better. The strict enforcement of aesthetic standards protected property values. The expanded authority of the HOA created a more orderly community. But what he failed to understand was that his vision wasn't necessarily shared by everyone else. And even if it had been, that didn't give him the right to ignore legal procedures and individual rights to implement it. The scariest part is how close he came to getting away with it. If I hadn't come home when I did, if I hadn't been willing to stand up to him, if I hadn't had the resources to hire an attorney, he might have successfully stolen my land and gotten away with it. And even if that particular scheme had been exposed eventually, he could have continued his pattern of financial misconduct and abuse of authority for years. Most people don't have the time or knowledge to carefully audit HOA decisions, and Bill was counting on that ignorance to cover his tracks. The investigation revealed that he'd been gradually expanding his authority for 2 years, testing to see how much he could get away with. Each time he overstepped his bounds and nobody challenged him, he became bolder about the next violation. It started with small things, interpreting ambiguous covenant language in favor of stricter enforcement, approving landscaping projects without proper board votes, making unilateral decisions about community standards. When nobody pushed back, he moved on to bigger violations. Spending HOA money without authorization, claiming authority over non-HOA property, fabricating justifications for his decisions. The excavation of my yard wasn't an impulsive mistake. It was the culmination of a 2-year pattern of escalating misconduct, and if I hadn't stopped him, there's no telling how far he would have gone. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Back when I was in the Army, my tank driver was someone who you'd really not want to spend time with unless you absolutely had to. Like, for instance, if you were in a tank crew with him and needed the tank to actually get from point A to point B. When it comes to crew breakdown in a tank, it goes like this. Tank gunner, my position. Coolest job in the tank, you get to shoot the big gun. You also have to do the least amount of maintenance work on the tank. Loader, does most of the idiot work in the tank. Has to carry and load multiple heavy tank shells, 45 to 50 kilograms each. Not much maintenance work, but spends like 2 to 3 hours cleaning the 3 machine guns. Driver, drives the tank. Pretty simple, but a good driver will give you a smooth ride. A bad driver will make you feel every dip and bump in the terrain. Does the most maintenance work since they are in charge of the tank tracks and bogies, steel wheels in the tracks. Tank commander knows how to do all the positions, doesn't do any maintenance since they are usually in briefings on maintenance day. A good crew knows how to begin to think alike, doing things together without asking. It helps that you sleep together in the tank, so you all get to know each other pretty intimately. Nothing like pissing in a water bottle to remove any shyness between crew members. When it comes to maintenance, you can either have all the gunners from the platoon get together and work on all the platoon's tanks together, same with drivers/gunners, or each crew can do their own tank. Usually we prefer the first option because it goes quicker. In this case, my crew was sent to support an infantry exercise on a different base in the middle of the desert on our own. We were simulating a whole tank company, but budget cuts meant only one tank was sent. Sunday we got to base and deployed with our tank down into the exercise area. Monday to Wednesday night we exercised. Thursday morning the drill ended, and it was maintenance day. Crucial element here is that you don't get to go home for the weekend until your maintenance is complete. The flip side being that you could leave as soon as maintenance was completed and signed off on. The entire exercise, the driver was being a complete ass. I don't know if his girlfriend broke up with him or whatever, but he was even more annoying than usual. Aside from his attitude, his driving was so bad the TC almost broke a rib one time, and I nearly got a black eye when shooting in motion, and he, unintentionally I'm sure, aimed straight for a small ditch. By the time Thursday came around, the loader and I couldn't get rid of him for the weekend quickly enough. But alas, first, maintenance beckoned. One of the tasks the gunner has to do is clean the cannon with a oiled cleaning rod. This is a 3-man job, loader in the tank, and 2 people clean it from the outside. It can't be done by one person no matter how strong they are. I asked the driver to help me since the loader was inside the tank. The driver angrily told me he didn't want to hear from me or speak to me. No worries, I found somebody to give me a hand for a few minutes and we got the job done. I completed the rest of my maintenance work pretty quickly. Like I said, not much actually, with the help of the loader, and then I gave him a hand cleaning the machine guns. The 2 of us were done before lunchtime, just waiting for the TC to sign off on our work so we could start our weekend early. Driver, on the other hand, realized that he didn't have any other drivers to help him maintain the tracks, tension, tightening bolts, greasing ports, etc., and he had told us to F off. He was still working on the tank when it got dark and was told to stop for safety reasons. He had to continue the job on Friday morning and missed out on a day of leave. I want to say that his attitude changed on Sunday when we got back to base, but you know it didn't. Thankfully, after about 2 more months of his nonsense, he was transferred out. I have no idea where he is today. I'm still good friends with the loader, and TC, the driver, can get bent. The next one is an entitled People Story. Backstory: a few years ago, I bought my first house in a medium-sized 500 to 1,000 homes neighborhood in a southern state. It had an HOA, but I actually picked the neighborhood because they had the lowest HOA dues in the city, the fewest rules, and the house was by far the nicest one I could afford in my budget. After a few weeks, I get a violation notice from the HOA telling me that I had 2 violations needing correction. My lawn was not green enough. My trash cans were too close to my driveway. I was thoroughly confused about number 1 as it was February in the middle of winter, so of course my lawn was dead, like pretty much everyone else's, so I had assumed that either this was a mistake or an existing offense from the previous owner. As for the trash cans, I kept them on the side of my house, and I think when the HOA came by, my trash cans stuck out past the side wall roughly 1 foot. So how dare I? I shrugged them off and continued on. Come March, I got another notice, this time fining me for both violations. Each one cost me $100, and they wanted the money in 2 weeks. I was pissed. This has made no sense, and I was not about to let them just try and get money for BS violations. So I called the management company that worked with the board to get them appealed. The lady told me that I needed to appeal directly to the board and that I could do so in the next annual meeting in a few days. So I of course showed up to the meeting. Prior to it starting, I met with a few homeowners and learned that they were all there for similar BS violations and were pissed off too. I then talked with one of the members of the board about the fine appeals process. He was an older guy in his 70s with short gray hair and a very worn and angry face. He asked what I was getting fined for, and when I told him, he just looked at me and said, "And you should get fined for that. Young people like you not taking care of their homes is the whole reason I got on this board. Learn to be a better property owner." This dude was the VP of a volunteer board telling me that I did not know how to take care of my house. What a sad life. The meeting then started, and the moderator mentioned that since this was an annual meeting, we would be voting on 3/5 of the board members. They had some applicants to the board, and we could also nominate someone today. That's when I had the idea of how I could get my revenge. When the election part of the meeting came, I nominated myself, gave some BS speech about HOAs are not here to make money, and that I wanted to serve my community. I won in a landslide, and you could see the board members getting annoyed because they had scowled during my speech. After the meeting, I appealed my violation in a very elegant way, and they agreed to waive my trash can violation. As for the grass one, apparently since I had weeds growing in my yard, like tiny patches in the corner, they were still fining me because the weeds were turning yellow after I sprayed them. I was dumbfounded how they could get away with this, but they used a technicality in the bylaws that I had signed, so I ended up losing $100. Revenge, I will be honest, I had not expected this to work. After joining the board of 5, including myself, I was appointed secretary and had to help maintain meeting notes and review records. They specifically told me that I was not allowed to propose new policies, but I could vote on new ones proposed by the VP or president, which I later learned was actually a violation of their own rules. I voted every new rule down as long as I was in that position. I decided that my best course of action was to listen to how the others operated and look for an opening to get each of them off the board. The first opening came when the president, who literally looked like the most Karen woman ever, mentioned that she had wanted to fine for flowers that were not neutral color. Basically, if a homeowner wanted to add something like turquoise flowers, we would fine them. She apparently had a neighbor that had flowers that she didn't like, and she wanted to use the board to stop them. It was pretty insane. I then started my revenge on her. I started a message thread on Slack, since that's how we communicated, with the other board members and asked what they had thought about her policy and reasoning. After far too much deliberation, 2 of them honestly thought that this was okay. We agreed that the policy went too far. I then made a long post in the main channel telling her that her actions were not only wrong, but that she should be excused from the board. When she inevitably flipped out, I called a board meeting in the following week, and the other 4 board members voted her off for targeting a community member for personal gain. She gave a sob story about how the board was her life and that the neighborhood was like her child, but I didn't care. That was 1 down. I convinced one of my good neighbor friends to join a little later on to take her spot. The next members I targeted were the treasurer and director, as I wanted to save the VP for last. They were actually pretty easy to get off the board because they were very easily swayed by public opinion. So I made a fake account on Nextdoor and waited until spring when most of the violations go out. When the letters went out, I looked for angry posts on Nextdoor. I then would comment on each one, giving them the first names of the 2 board members as the culprits and told them to come to the next HOA meeting to appeal. It worked far better than I had expected. During the next meeting, over 50 people showed up and called out those by name. It was glorious. During the open session, community members grilled those 2 for their poor policies, even though they did not make most of them. The VP, now president after the other one resigned, tried to defend them but ultimately failed. The 2 members were so distraught after the meeting, and I told them that maybe they should resign, and they both did. That was 2 more down, both of which were replaced by a couple who came to the same meeting and wanted to get rid of these rules. Finally, the board had been flipped to 4 out of 5 people wanting to get rid of all these dumb rules. The president, however, was still the same old angry, hateful man. He tried to add more rules to increase violation revenue, and we voted him down every time. He started to get annoyed, but stayed steadfast to the board. I tried a lot of tactics to get him to leave, and not much swayed him. A few months went by, and we started with a new management company. They had a much better style of property management and a website for looking through our community's records as well as automated reports. When we got our first fines report, I hit pay dirt. The president's house appeared, and he owed around $10,000. Apparently, he had open violations that he had never paid, and the other management company hid it from the board for years, since he had been on the board for close to 7 years. So, I looked into remedies. Since his fines were over $3,000, our bylaws stated that a majority vote of the board could start an HOA foreclosure on the home, which I still think is insane that HOAs can do that. So I got all the docs together and double-checked with the new management company that the fines were correct, which they confirmed. I called an emergency board session, presented the information, and 4 out of 5 of us voted to start the foreclosure process. The president got angry, cursed, and left the meeting early. We were informed a few days later that the president had resigned, paid his fine, and put his house up for sale. While I am sad we couldn't force a foreclosure, at least he was off the board. I'm currently president to this day, and I've reduced the fining policy to be a maximum of $400, and homeowners can appeal anytime that they wish digitally. In addition, I have banned any grass fines until May, and trash can violations have been super relaxed. Moral of the story, never fine me $200, call me a stupid young kid, and expect to not lose your house. The next story is titled, My Neighbor Reported Me to the Police for Refusing to Sell My Land/Property. Growing up in the small town of Lomas de Zamora, Argentina, I always knew my family's land was something special. My father and his father before him had worked the land for generations. When my father passed away, I inherited the land and continued to run the family farm. However, that's when things took a turn for the worse. My neighbor, who we'll call Carlos, had always been friendly with my family. We shared meals, traded goods, and looked after each other's homes when we were away. However, when I inherited the land and decided to expand my farm, Carlos suddenly became hostile. He offered to buy the land from me, but I refused. That's when he started harassing me and my family. He would blast his music late into the night, make false accusations about us to the authorities, and even vandalize our property. I tried to ignore him and focus on my work, but things escalated quickly. One day I came home to find the police waiting for me. Carlos had called them and claimed that I was growing illegal substances on my land. They searched my property and found nothing, but Carlos wasn't satisfied. He continued to harass me and my family, making our lives miserable. That's when I knew I had to take action. I decided to install security cameras around my property, hoping to catch Carlos in the act. It wasn't long before he struck again. This time he set fire to one of my fields, destroying all of my crops. The cameras caught everything and I took the footage to the police. They arrested Carlos and he was forced to pay for the damage he had caused. However, he didn't stop there. He continued to harass me, making threats and causing trouble. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. That's when I decided to sell my land and move my family to a new town. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was for the best. I found a buyer and prepared to leave everything behind. However, on the day of the sale, Carlos showed up at my property demanding that I sell the land to him. I refused, and that's when he called the police on me, claiming that I was trespassing on his property. They arrived and saw through his lies, but it was too late. The sale fell through and I was left with nothing. However, I didn't give up. I knew I had to fight back, so I went to the media and shared my story. It wasn't long before people started to take notice and the community rallied behind me. They organized a protest demanding that Carlos leave me and my family alone. The protest was a success and Carlos finally left us alone. However, I was still left without a home or a livelihood. That's when something incredible happened. A group of local farmers heard my story and offered to help me start over. They gave me a piece of their land and helped me rebuild my farm. Months went by and things were going well. I had a new farm and business was booming. The support from the community had been overwhelming, and I was grateful for every single person who had stood by my side. However, just when I thought my troubles were behind me, Carlos showed up again. He came to my farm, unannounced, and demanded that I sell him the land that I had acquired. I tried to reason with him, but he was beyond reason. He told me that he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, and that he would ruin me if I didn't comply. I knew I couldn't let him win, so I called the police. They arrived quickly and took him away, but I could tell that this was far from over. I knew that he would come back and that he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Over the next few weeks, things escalated quickly. Carlos started to spread false rumors about me and my business, telling people that I was a fraud and that I was selling contaminated food. I tried to ignore him, but the damage had been done. My reputation was in tatters and my business was suffering. That's when I received a call from a group of lawyers. They had seen my story in the news and had offered to help me fight Carlos in court. They believed that we could win and that we could finally put an end to his reign of terror. We spent months in court fighting tooth and nail against Carlos and his team of lawyers. It was a grueling process, but in the end, justice prevailed. The judge ruled in my favor, and Carlos was forced to pay me a large sum of money in damages. I thought that would be the end of it, but Carlos wasn't done yet. He appealed the decision and took the case to a higher court. I was devastated, but I knew that I couldn't give up. I had come too far to let him win now. The appeal process was even longer and more grueling than the first trial, but in the end, justice prevailed once again. The higher court ruled in my favor, and Carlos was finally forced to leave me and my family alone. It's been a few years since then, and I'm happy to say that I'm doing better than ever. My farm is thriving, and my business is stronger than ever. Carlos is long gone, but I know that his legacy will always be a part of me. I will never forget what he did to me and my family, but I will also never forget the kindness and generosity of those who helped me through the darkest time of my life. The last story is titled, My Mom Killed My Fake Baby. This happened in high school when I was like 16. Now I am 26 and I'm still bitter about it because it wrecked my GPA. So when I was in high school, I was in home ec for the second year in a row. At my school, we had different levels of home ec. Like how there's a Spanish 1, Spanish 2, Spanish 3. So freshman year, you did the boiled egg baby experiment, but in the higher level class, we got these fancy robotic baby dolls. The dolls had sensors in them in different spots, the mouth, the back, the bottom. We got these key fobs that were screwed into cloth diapers or built into bottles that when the baby would cry, we would put the fob across the sensor and the baby would stop crying. The baby also had a sensor in the neck that if the neck went too far back, it registered it as broken on your chart. We were assigned the babies for one weekend. At this time, I was in marching band and I had games on Friday nights. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to hear the baby cry over the crowd and the band. So I asked my mom to babysit. I showed her how all the key fobs worked and all that. She said she'd do no prob, so I go to the game, do my marching band stuff, I go home. I get the baby back and my mom says that everything went well. I noticed when she gave it back that the baby did have some different baby clothes on, and she said they'd gone over to my aunt's and the cousins had dressed the baby up, but that she watched them. I got a little annoyed. Told her it wasn't a toy, that it was my grade, but she told me to calm down. So the rest of the weekend goes by, I take care of the baby, and I didn't miss anything. To be fair, I'd been watching kids since I was 14, and my job at the time was at a daycare. I got Fridays off for games, and they were closed weekends. So Monday rolls around, we turn in the babies, and they print out our reports from the computer. I got like a really low score. Like a 57 or something like that. I failed, that's for sure. I'm so mad because I didn't do anything wrong. I hadn't missed a thing. On the printout, it said that baby's neck had broken like over 10 times, had been left in a dirty diaper like 8 times, and hadn't been fed around the same amount. To say I was shocked was an understatement. I knew I wasn't the one who'd done, or I guess not done, any of that, so I obviously confronted my mom, outraged. She had tanked my grade and I was an A and B student. She denied the whole thing, and my stepdad tried to say it was me who did, and I was just trying to push blame on my mom because I didn't want to admit I did something wrong. So I went back to my teacher and asked her if she could print out another list of the infractions, except this time with timestamps on them. She said she could. I also asked that if I could get a letter from my parents saying that they had done all that stuff to the baby that she could pass me, and she said that she'd have to see. So I get the paper, and sure enough, every infraction was in between the time I dropped the baby off with my mom and the time I picked it up after the game. I took the paper to my mom and confronted her. I remember my stepdad had the audacity to say I had faked it somehow. But I finally got her to admit that she had basically let the little cousins take it to their bedroom and play with it like it was a baby doll, all while she and my stepdad got drunk with my aunt. They wrote the letter and I got a C. But like, I'm clearly still resentful. I basically swore that day to never trust my mom with my future kids. This was also when I started to wise up to just how bad my mom and stepdad's drinking was. I had been dealing with it, but been in denial since like the 8th grade. But that fall, it really just hit me how unreliable they were and how much they prioritized their drinking over me.
The next one is an entitled People Story.
A very, very good friend of mine recently got on a plane with her 3 boys, 8, 9, and 10, by herself to visit with Grandma for a month over summer vacation. I was on transport duty because driving to and from the airport is a young man's game, and also I love spending time with my homies. There was an accidentally on purpose scheduling issue, namely my friend wanted a day in a hotel to recuperate from the flight with her 3 boys before her mom starts driving her insane. Husband is coming up in a few weeks because he just started a new job and can't just be like, back in a month. So I snatch all 4 people and luggage from the airport and give them a lift to the hotel. All 3 boys are bouncing off the walls and my friend just needs a nap. So, hotel pool time. She's posted up under an umbrella and is dead to the world. I'm in the pool with the boys. We started off playing Marco Polo and then had to get creative once other folks were in the pool as well. Eventually we settled on a game called Not Done Yet. Basically, I'm standing on one side of the steps out of the pool, and when the boys feel like it, they try and leave the pool. I decide if they're done or not yet, using a complicated examination process that amounts to picking the kid up, giving them a bit of a shake, faking a big sniff, say, not done yet, and yeet them back into the pool. Obviously, if someone's waterlogged or actually wants out, I won't stop them, but typically there's giggling and a bit of cue for inspection, so the game continues. I get a workout, they get tired out, everybody wins. Then a new player enters the playing field in the form of a very sweet-looking girl, approximately 6 years old, wearing water wings. She asks if she can play too. I say, of course she can, but she needs to ask whoever's watching her first so I know it's okay with everyone. She says, okay, and exits the pool. I'm keeping an eye on where she's going so I can smile and give the I'm not a creep wave to whoever's minding the kid. Only, she doesn't run to one of the adults on the lounge chairs, she runs back into the hotel dripping wet. She disappears inside and comes back down about 5 minutes later and says, Mommy says it's okay. Only she's not the type of kid who lies without batting an eye and is obviously fibbing. I ask if she really did, and the little girl says, well, Mommy was busy, so I think it's okay. It's at this point that the proverbial record scratches and my inner monologue says, what? I summon the oldest of the boys from the waterborne shenanigans and ask him to go wake up his mom so she can keep an eye on things for a minute. I need to go take care of something. While he's bearding the dragon in her den, I crouch down and tell the little girl, we need to go inside and find an adult because it's not okay that you're in the pool all by yourself, okay? You didn't do anything wrong, but you've got some growing to do before you can be in the pool all by yourself, okay? At this point, oldest homie has awoken the mom and she's now looking at me with a what the crap look on her face. I mouth later at her and then take the little girl's hand and bring her to the concierge desk of the hotel. I explain the situation with the little girl to the concierge, whose face goes from confusion to pained before giving the girl a smile and thanking me for bringing this to his attention. Concierge guy takes responsibility for the girl, and I go back out to the pool to explain what had happened to my friend. She was livid on the little girl's behalf, but mostly just wanted to resume her nap. Conveniently, at that time, middle homie had gotten out of the pool and was making faces at us while we were talking. I told friend to get some sleep, I'll watch the boys. Then middle homie got spear tackled back into the water because actions have consequences. Maybe 20 minutes to half an hour later, once I was starting to run out of steam, I sensed a disturbance in the force. A rather irate woman wearing a blouse that was inside out was dragging the little girl from before out to the pool area and demanding to know who told her she couldn't swim. The little girl, who was now silent with tears on her cheeks and a pathetically deflated water wing, pointed at me. I was instructed to get my ass out of the pool and explain myself. Why on earth was it so hard to watch an extra child while she got some adult time to herself? Why did I insist on ruining her first chance to get away from it all in months? Her little girl is an angel and it's no trouble to watch, blah blah blah. I explained that it wasn't a good idea to leave a little one in a pool with no adult supervision, pointing to a number of signs about no lifeguard on duty, all children must be accompanied by an adult, etc, etc. Inside Out Lady is getting steadily more belligerent, explaining like I'm slow that her daughter knows how to swim and was wearing floaties and would have been fine. She's getting more and more in my face, trying to act like I'm just the worst for ruining everything. And then player 3 enters the fight. It's my friend, and she's fresh out of fluffs to give. She starts reading Inside Out Lady, the riot act, demanding to know how she could be so stupid and irresponsible, and how dare she try and act like I'm the bad guy here. Inside Out Lady opens her mouth to reply and just gets steamrolled. Just look at your daughter. See what you've done? Appeared to finally get through to the woman because she looks down at her daughter, then back up to my friend. There's a flicker of shame on her face, and then it's all rage, and she swung. I am not ashamed to admit that stepping between those two without backup seemed like a poor life choice. I stopped the boys before they could get caught in the crossfire, told them to take a step back, and when several hotel employees came out to break up the fight, I stepped in. I grabbed my friend and pulled her back while two guys from the hotel grabbed the other woman. The combatants are separated and the police are called. Myself and my friend are back at her lounge chair with a large first aid kit the hotel staff gave us while the boys hover and make sure mom's okay. She's sporting a magnificent shiner from the first punch and a couple other scrapes and bruises, but mostly seems livid that she got cold-clocked like that. Police arrive and get the story from everyone, even tangentially involved. We wind up being asked to provide contact information to the police. My friend declines a check over by an EMT, saying she's fine, just sore. The story Inside Out Lady provided didn't match up at all with what the hotel cameras showed, and she got some shiny bracelets put on her before getting shoved in the back of a squad car. My friend said she would be delighted to press charges for assault and was told the police would be in touch. Once the police were satisfied, it was definitely time to retreat to the hotel room. I got dressed and left for the evening after making sure everybody was okay, and on the way out, I asked one of the front desk folks what happened with the woman and her daughter. The woman was arrested and the girl's father came to get her. They couldn't give me any more information than that. Hope she's okay. The next story is titled, My Garden Destroyed by HOA Neighbor's Illegal Pool on Our Shared Lawn. Living in an HOA can be both a blessing and a curse, and I always thought I was lucky because I never had any major issues with them. However, when my neighbor moved in, I realized that his self-centered nature and his desire to one-up me could lead to potential problems. At first, his attempts to measure both of our properties seemed harmless, but as time went on, it became apparent that he was just trying to prove he had more land than me. While I didn't think it was a big deal, it was clear that my neighbor had a need to feel superior to me, which led to bigger problems down the line. Our driveways were slanted due to the hill on which our land was situated, and when my neighbor wanted to make his less steep, I thought it was a good idea. However, he went about it in a way that caused water to filter into my land. At first it wasn't too bad, but it soon became apparent that this was going to cause issues for me. I was concerned, but since it was legally done, I couldn't do anything about it. The real problems began when my neighbor decided to build a pool on our shared lawn without any permit or permission from the HOA. At first I thought it was innocent enough, but it quickly became apparent that my neighbor was using my property to build his pool without my consent. Not only was this illegal, but it also led to severe damage when a storm hit. During the storm, the pool flooded and quickly started to destroy my garden. To make matters worse, the water picked up my car and started carrying it towards the main road. I felt powerless and there was nothing I could do to stop the water from destroying my property. After the storm, I was devastated to see the damage caused by the flood. Everything in my garden was ruined and my car was totaled. I knew I had to do something to get justice, so I reported the illegal pool to the city code enforcement and informed the HOA about the damage to my house caused by my neighbor's driveway repair. My neighbor was forced to remove the pool and pay a huge fine to the HOA, but he refused to take responsibility for the damage he caused to my property. That's when I decided to take him to court and present evidence of his wrongdoing. It wasn't an easy process, but I knew I had to fight for my rights. In the end, my neighbor was ordered to pay for the yard repair and the value of my car. I was relieved that I had finally gotten justice, but I wasn't done yet. I wanted to teach my neighbor a lesson, so I decided to build a pool right in front of his house. I knew he couldn't do anything about it since I followed all the necessary procedures and got all the permits. When my neighbor saw my new pool, he was furious. I could tell he was jealous and couldn't stand the fact that I had something he couldn't. He continued to brag about his property, but deep down I knew he was envious of my new pool. I thought my revenge was complete, but I was wrong. My neighbor decided to retaliate and filed a complaint with the HOA about my pool, claiming it was causing damage to his property. I knew it wasn't true since I made sure to build it safely and legally, but he was determined to get back at me. I had to go through a long and arduous process of proving that my pool wasn't causing any damage, but in the end, I won the case. My neighbor was forced to stop making false claims, and I was relieved that my new pool wasn't going to cause any further problems. It's been a few years since the HOA has put a stop to my neighbor's attempts to sabotage my pool, and I can finally enjoy it without any worries. My neighbor still glares at my pool every time he walks by, but I don't let it bother me anymore. In fact, I've even made a few new friends in the neighborhood who love coming over to swim in my pool. As time went on, I started to notice something strange happening. My neighbor was spending more time than usual outside of his house, and he was always staring at my pool. It was almost like he was planning something, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. One day, I came home from work and found something disturbing in my backyard. My pool had been drained, and there was a sign next to it that said, "This pool is a nuisance and a danger to the neighborhood. It must be removed immediately." I was shocked and furious. I knew my neighbor was behind this, but I had no proof. I immediately called the HOA and the police to report the vandalism. They investigated the matter, and after a few days, they found out that my neighbor was indeed responsible for the vandalism. It turned out that he was jealous of my pool and couldn't stand the fact that I had something he couldn't. He thought that if he got rid of my pool, he would be the most popular person in the neighborhood. The HOA fined him heavily for the vandalism, and he was also ordered to pay for the damages to my pool. He never apologized, but I knew that he had learned his lesson. He never bothered me or my pool again, and I could finally enjoy it in peace. A few months later, I received some exciting news. A film production company was interested in using my pool as a location for their new movie. They were offering me a significant amount of money for the use of my pool, and I couldn't say no. The movie was a hit, and my pool became famous overnight. People from all over the country wanted to come and see it, and I even started getting fan mail. It was surreal, but I enjoyed every minute of it. Today, my pool is still a popular location for movies and TV shows. I've even been approached by some celebrities who want to use it for their private parties. It's hard to believe that something that caused me so much trouble in the past has now become a source of joy and pride. As for my neighbor, he moved away a few years ago. I don't know where he went, but I wish him all the best. I learned that revenge is never the answer, and sometimes it's best to let go of grudges and move on. I'm just grateful that I was able to turn a negative situation into something positive, and I hope that my pool will continue to bring joy and happiness to people for many years to come. The last story is titled, "Neighbors Used My Property as Their Own. Paid for New Fence." I recently bought a house and have been having some work done before I move in. It was empty on the market for about 6 or 8 months before I bought it. One morning I got a call from my contractor asking me about moving the cars in the driveway, and of course I had no idea what he was talking about. I hadn't moved in yet. I left my job site and drove nearly a half hour to get there. As soon as I arrived, the people on the east side of me were walking towards the cars. I asked if they were their cars, and they said yes. They told me that they had been parking there for a few months with permission from the owners. I informed them that I was the new owner and they can't park there any longer. We went back and forth, and with the intention of being a good neighbor and trying to show some goodwill, I agreed to allow them to park there for a few more weeks until I move in, with the agreement that they would move them by 6 a.m. every morning. The rest of the week went by without incident. The contractor called me about scheduling a walkthrough on Saturday, and we set a time for early afternoon. When I arrived, there were 4 cars in the driveway and nowhere to park. The only on-street parking is 2 blocks away. I called them and asked them to move their vehicles, reminding them of our agreement. After 20 minutes, they finally came out and moved them. Speaking with them, they claimed to have misunderstood and thought our agreement only referred to weekdays and not weekends. I corrected them and moved on. Sunday morning, I grabbed a trailer and loaded some furniture to take over and store in the garage. Once again, there were cars in the driveway. I called them and got VM. I texted and said they had until a tow truck could arrive to get them moved. No answer. I called a tow company. 45 minutes later, 2 tow trucks showed up, backed in, and hooked up to the cars. All of a sudden, the neighbors were home. They ran out to stop their cars from being towed, and it ended up costing them a little over $300 to get them unhooked. I called my contractor and asked if he knew someone who could put in a driveway gate, and he did. I let the neighbors know that they could no longer use my driveway. On Wednesday, I get a call from the gate installer telling me that there are cars in the driveway. I called them and said tow trucks are on the way. They moved. The gate was installed and I went by to pick up the opener that evening. The neighbor's husband came out to confront me and I opted to just call the PD and deal with it legally. That Saturday, I went by to accept an outdoor furniture delivery and check on things when I noticed a towel beside the pool and a small kid's flotation device. My initial thought was that I just hadn't noticed it before, so I wrote it off and threw them both in the trash. On Saturday, the movers arrived with everything and we began moving things in. About 7 p.m., my daughter and I left to go grab some dinner, arriving back at the house around 9:30 p.m. The neighbors were in my pool. They were hanging out and using my furniture. When I opened the door and began raising hell, they told the kids to go to the house and the children ran to a corner of our fence and just walked through. They had cut out the privacy fence so it could be removed and had been using the pool at their leisure for who knows how long. Again, I called the police and filed a complaint. The dad was arrested for trespassing, DPP, and an outstanding warrant, and the oldest boy, 20M, for an outstanding warrant. I replaced the fence with a new one because they had destroyed the posts, runners, and pickets by removing and reinstalling the panel. Small Claims awarded me the total cost of 83 feet of 8-foot privacy fence, which came out to $3,800. The following Monday morning around 5 a.m., their cars were parked in the street where there's no street parking, so I made a phone call. They were gone when I left at 7 a.m. I haven't been paid yet, but I did notice a for rent sign in their yard this morning, so that's just as good. Good riddance.
The next one is an entitled people story.
So, I retaliate with noise pollution. I live in an apartment complex. Neighbor below me continues to smoke, which then blows into my apartment. I can't stand the smell. They've been asked to stop and a complaint lodged with Strata. They live on the bottom floor, so their courtyard extends out a few meters past my balcony, and this is where they sit and smoke. So now, I use a Bluetooth speaker angled down at their courtyard and I play children's highly repetitive songs, The Wiggles, whenever they're out there smoking. I have to shut all the windows since they're smoking, so I can't hear it. So it doesn't bother me, but they don't seem to enjoy it all that much.
The next story is titled HOA called the police on me for having a wheelchair-accessible RV in my driveway and towed it away. I sued them for $265,000. I'm here to tell you about the difficult experience my family went through when we moved into a new neighborhood. My husband is a veteran and was injured while serving in Afghanistan, leaving him wheelchair-bound. To make life easier for him and our family, we purchased an RV with wheelchair access. We parked it in our driveway, and that's when the trouble started. Our homeowner association, HOA, began sending us fines for public obstruction. We tried explaining the situation, but they wouldn't listen. They claimed that the RV was too big for our driveway, even though we had done our due diligence and made sure it would fit before we made the purchase. One day, the police showed up at our door, claiming they received an anonymous tip about strange noises coming from our RV. They searched the RV and found nothing, but it was clear that our HOA was behind this. We felt harassed and targeted, and we didn't know what to do. The harassment continued, and it took a toll on our family. We felt like we didn't belong in this neighborhood, and we were constantly on edge. One day, we decided to take a road trip with our RV to clear our minds. When we returned home, we found our front yard in flames. The fire had spread from a neighbor's yard, destroying our fence and our spare pickup truck. We were devastated, but we didn't know who was responsible for the fire. The next morning, we woke up to find our RV was missing. We suspected that our HOA had something to do with it, especially since we received no notice or warning about it being towed away. We were furious and went straight to our HOA president's house to confront him. He denied knowing anything about it, but we weren't convinced. We called the police to report the RV stolen, and the investigation led us straight to the impound lot where our RV was being held. The HOA president was caught red-handed, and he and the HOA were ordered to pay $265,000 in damages. It was a small victory for our family, but it was a win nonetheless. We were finally able to get the justice we deserved. However, our victory was short-lived. A few months later, we received a letter from our mortgage lender stating that they were going to foreclose on our home. We were shocked and didn't know what to do. It turned out that our HOA had placed a lien on our property for the $265,000 in damages they were ordered to pay us. We couldn't believe it. We thought we had won, but now we were about to lose everything. We decided to fight back and hired a lawyer to represent us. We spent countless hours in court, and the stress was overwhelming. But we refused to give up. After months of legal battles, we finally won our case. The HOA was ordered to remove the lien on our property, and our home was safe. As an update, we have since moved out of that neighborhood and into a new community that is much more welcoming and accepting of our needs. It was a difficult experience, but we learned that standing up for ourselves is always worth it in the end. We hope that by sharing our story, we can inspire others to do the same.
The next story is titled, the car dealerships and trying to upsell you. Took my car in for an oil and filter change. Oil and filter. That's it. Sat waiting in the Toyota lobby for this to get done. For some reason, it takes an hour and a half. Guy comes back with my key and proceeds to tell me that the air filter is dirty. Also tells me I need new brakes. We're in the lobby, and it's full of people sitting around and waiting for their cars also to be finished. I reply to the guy as loud and obnoxiously as I can, I change the air filter myself, which is located in the glove box at the back, and it was with a carbon filter, hence why it looks black. I had one set of brakes changed towards the tail end of 2020, with ceramic brakes that were rated for 100,000 miles of use, and the other set of brakes were just done this past summer after a trip to Colorado and squeaking that was occurring. That paperwork is also in the glove box if you would like me to dig it out. I cannot stand it when they try to upsell you every time. Also, I went in for an oil and filter change. Why are you looking at my brakes? The next story is titled, Mean High School Teacher Payback. So back when I was in high school, I had one teacher who was particularly mean. She was an older lady and she had it out for me for some reason. She was my first class of the day, and it always tainted my day. She was clearly going through menopause because her classroom was always like a freezer. I would be literally shaking. So I started wearing my jacket to class to stay warm. She decided to implement a rule targeting at me that no jackets could be worn in class because it was a fire hazard. It literally made no sense. So one day I'm wearing my jacket in her class and she asks me to remove it. I comply, but I'm wearing a tank top underneath. This is against the dress code. When girls would break the dress code as punishment, the principal would make them wear their jackets. This is in the days before Gen X and students fighting sexist dress codes. She sent me straight to the principal, who asked me to then wear my jacket. The frustration in her face by outsmarting her was priceless. I'm still proud. The next story is titled, Did I Do That? A Little Tale of Side Revenge. This is part of a much bigger ongoing saga that should reach a conclusion soon, and may make an appearance in Pro Revenge. However, it's pretty satisfying on its own. Sorry I'm not more specific on some things, but future legal concerns. A short time ago, I was unjustly fired.
A few days after, I wrote a response to their severance offer that included an entire account of the crap show that had taken place. I made sure to send it to all the CXO dogs, except for one charming fellow. Now, the very day they fired me, I had come into some interesting info about CF that I thought might be valuable. So, when I was countering their offer, I casually mentioned that XX amount shouldn't be a problem for the company since they could afford to pay a certain expense for CF at over thousands of dollars a month. To be honest, I was only guessing at the amount, but I had a good ballpark estimate. I was also betting on the fact that none of the other Sea Dogs knew about this arrangement. 3 days later, CF resigned from the company. I also heard that the rumors circulating about him and his sudden resignation included the word embezzlement. The next story is titled, "Entitled Mother Attempts to Steal My Nintendo Switch and Thousands of Dollars Worth of Games, then Tries to Get Me Arrested for It." To preface this, I recently graduated from university and landed myself a pretty well-paying job working as an analyst for a major banking company. My first day is the week after next. A couple of weeks ago, I moved to a gated apartment complex in a wealthy suburb of DC, and I'm making use of their gym. On days that I work my upper body, I use a game called Fitness Boxing 2 with their in-gym punching bag. Now, my community regularly does apartment tours that include their facilities, so I will see one of the employees walking around with people, and early today, it was a woman with her 8 or 9-year-old son. This kid immediately takes an interest in the game I'm playing, and I offered to let him try it out, but his mom called him back, and I was nearly done anyway, so I put my Switch in its case and put it in the cubbies that people put their things in. Now, a few minutes later, I'm on one of the other pieces of equipment, and I see the kid walking out with his mom, carrying my Switch case. I immediately knew it was mine, because I have a very brightly colored one, but even then, I go to double check that my Switch was gone, and sure enough, it was. Now, everyone's been an annoying kid at some point, so I'm actually not particularly mad. I catch up to them and the tour guide and speak to the mom, telling her that her son walked out with my Switch. I figured she'd be embarrassed and have him give it back, treating it like a learning lesson or something, but instead, she takes it from him and says, "No, that's his game. You must be mistaken." I was bewildered. My initial reaction was, this isn't funny, because I could not fathom how somebody could be so quick to lie about something like this. Now, I look at the tour guide. I don't know her really, but we do see each other on a regular basis as I'm really trying to be consistent with going to the gym. She knows it's mine, tries to ask the woman if she's sure, and of course, this is when she gets angry and says that if I keep harassing her and her family, she'll call the police. On one hand, I'm like, good. Call them, because I can readily prove it's mine, and we'll get to that. On the other hand, and I want to preface this by saying that I believe in getting rid of all identity-based assumptions, but that is a belief, not a reality. The reality is that if you're a man, especially a black man like myself, who has gotten at least semi-muscular, when you're in a public argument with a hysterical white woman, you have to pick your words very, very carefully. So, of course, she calls the cops, yelling, saying a scary African-American is harassing her and her son and trying to steal his game. And, like I said, wealthy suburb. So, a police officer is on the scene within minutes. I have to thank my lucky stars that the cop was smart enough to not immediately take sides and simply walked up to ask what was going on. So, of course, I let her go first, with her once again saying that I've been following her and her son. We were literally in the apartment clubhouse lobby, and trying to grab his game. After the cops looked to me, I put on my calmest, most docile voice to say, "That is not her son's Switch. It is mine. He took it from the gym cubbies, and if you have her open the case and turn it on, I will prove that it's mine instantly, because my Switch has a lock on it." And this is when the tour lady also says that she's pretty sure it's mine too. For those who don't know, you can jury-rig a lock code on the Switch using the Parental Controls app, so that you'd have to put in a PIN to play games or reset the Switch. It doesn't stop you from buying games though, unsurprisingly. The woman of course doesn't want to do this, saying I've caused her enough trouble, but luckily the cop wanted to hear me out. So this woman takes the Switch out of the case and turns it on. Firstly, I point to the profile at the top, which is of my me that looks exactly like me.
This woman manages to turn on a dime and say that they just recently bought it from a friend. That looks exactly like me. So I respond with, "Did that friend give you the parental controls password?" She says, "That's mine. I'm the parent. So turn it off." "I don't have to show anything to you." She immediately turns it off again and tries to put it away. But luckily, once again, this cop says that she has to show it if it really is hers. She turns it on and pauses because she has absolutely no idea how it works. So I kindly say, "You press the button at the top to prompt the PIN." Then I get my phone out. So she tries to put in a random combination, and of course, it doesn't work. And the interesting thing about the Switch parental controls is that if you put it in wrong, it sends a notification to the app. So within 30 seconds, I was showing the cop the "Your PIN was entered incorrectly" pop-up. Finally, this woman starts apologizing, saying it was an honest mistake, and hands me back my Switch and the case, and has the audacity to ask the tour lady to continue the tour. The cop says that it would be best that she leaves, and says that he's going to escort her to the car. This is when she gets mad at the complex, and says that she's never giving them her business, as she gets walked out the door. That's honestly what ticks me off. There's no happy ending. I have every game I've bought in the 4 years I've owned this Switch in this case, so between that and the Switch, stealing is well into the grand theft range. If the cop had immediately been against me, I would have been in jail by now. I would have lost my job that I haven't even started yet, and all the work I've put in for the past years to get here, for something that they would have quickly found out that they can't even use in the first damn place. And all she got was a nice stroll to her vehicle. I guess that's better than potentially having her and her crotch goblin as a neighbor. The next story is titled, "Dumped Me but stayed signed into your Netflix, did you?" So, my girlfriend dumped me a few years back after cheating, and I'm completely over it. Anyway, like I've said, I'm over it. So I thought that now was the best time to carry out my revenge. Because I'm over it. So I noticed that she left her Netflix logged in on my laptop, and Google has remembered the password. I have had my own since, but it always asks which account I'm going to log into and pre-populates her passwords, etc. So about last month, I just logged into it. I don't know why, but just was kind of half interested in what she'd been watching. I saw that she had been watching Breaking Bad and was on season 2, episode 3, and just logged out and didn't think much of it. Until 3 a.m. I woke up and had devised the most devious plan. I logged back into her account and just started letting it play right from where she had left off. Left it a couple of hours, then turned it off. So next time she logged in, it would have skipped a few episodes and the point as to where she was. I then started putting shows on I know she doesn't like, so it comes up on her recommended and really ducks up the algorithm. I just can't wait till she starts getting suggestions based on shows she doesn't like. It'd be a real shame if her and her new boyfriend fell out and started accusing the other of watching Breaking Bad when the other wasn't there, wouldn't it? Anyway, I'm over it, and not bitter anyway, so all good. Hope all goes well for her when she accuses her BF of watching Paw Patrol. The next story is titled, "Karen left diet books at a little library by a playground. She caught me chucking them out and had a dummy spit about how it's knowledge and I shouldn't throw them away. She said she would throw me on the ground and said I looked like I had a mental problem. Kept calm and didn't argue with her, let her make a fool of herself in front of people as she jammed her stupid books back in there. As soon as her back was turned, I put them in the bin with the rest. In hindsight, perhaps I should have suggested she ask for a refund because clearly they didn't work." The last story is titled, "My Neighbor Chose the Wrong One." We moved into a place a year ago. First-time buyers into a tenement building with a shared garden. The stairwell, or close as it is often termed, is self-factored, which gives the place a nice vibe and made it an appealing place to live. Upstairs neighbor was all over us when we arrived, checking in, sharing cakes and recipes, sitting in the garden with us and our dog, and generally things were lovely. We put on a few barbecues for our neighbors to help meet everyone and set us off to a good start. Precisely 1 year on, and upstairs neighbor now has an issue with the dog being in the garden as he has damaged some of her flowers. This is obviously not what we wanted, so straight away I suggest that I will happily spend my own money to supply timber and a handyman to build raised beds to prevent this happening again, and to make gardening easier for her. It'd be approximately $600 to do this. She complained of bending down and that she would be happier with raised beds previously. But not this day.
Today she wants to moan and moan and moan and moan. I walked away. I saw her the next day, and she went off again when I repeated my offer. Who's going to dig out the plants? And what about the soil I put in there? Then the law is on my side. The who what now? Moving on from there, I walk away and vow never to speak with her again, and to reduce our use of the garden we pay to share. Next, she builds spikes and puts in barbed wire, obviously to deter the dog or hurt him if he tries to go near the plants again. Big mistake. Linked is my pettiest of revenge. You may have heard of it. It is called an annoyotron. Powered by an insanely small battery, it lets out random, irritating, and varying sounds that go off at varying times and over varying lengths of time. I just bought 2. One has been vacuum packed and put in her Windows box, which sits outside of her bedroom, and the other behind a tile around her front door. I hope that this becomes a lesson for her that hell hath no fury like a gay man mildly inconvenienced.
The next one is an entitled people story.
A revenge story told by my best friend. He was bullied a lot as a kid. My friend was a Boy Scout, but of course there was a bully there as well, making his life miserable. When my friend was 9 to 10 years old, the Boy Scouts went on a weekend hike. They slept at a farm, all of them in the same room. The farm had a lot of apple trees. The fruit was ripe. The farmer told them to eat all the fruit they wanted. And so they did. Eating big amounts of apples has some strange effects. It is one of the few substances known to man that goes straight from the solid form to gas. When evening came, the farting started. Regarding boys' humor, nothing beats a good fart. So they had a lot of fun. My friend was very tired and was the first one to fall asleep in his sleeping bag. He suddenly woke up and looked up in an area of the human body that never sees the light of sun. The bully, of course, squatting over him and farting him straight in the face. The other boys thought it was hilarious and were howling with laughter. For my friend, this was the last drop. After a while, he pretended to fall back asleep. When everyone was fast asleep, he stood up and went over to the bully. He had his naked ass hovering an inch or two over the bully's nose, and then he fired the big cannon. He told me that if it had been a farting competition, he would have secured the gold medal for sure. The effect was instant. The sounds from the bully were a mix of screams and puking noises. He panicked and got stuck in his sleeping bag. Then, someone turned on the lights. It turned out that the fart was not entirely in gas form as intended. The horrified face of the bully had got a lot of instant freckles, and some in his mouth as well. He tried to bully my friend a few times after, but just whispering freckles was an instant mute. The next story is entitled
Neighbor chopped down a tree on my property to destroy my pool because I refused to let her access my pool. I had always dreamed of having a beautiful home, complete with a stunning pool in the backyard. When I finally found the perfect house on a quiet street, I was thrilled. It was everything I had ever wanted, and I couldn't wait to spend my weekends lounging by the pool, sipping a cold drink, and soaking up the sun. However, my excitement was short-lived when I met my neighbor Karen. From the moment I met her, I knew she was going to be trouble. She was a middle-aged woman with short, choppy hair, who seemed to enjoy nothing more than making other people's lives miserable. She was loud, brash, and had a sharp tongue that could cut through steel. I quickly learned that Karen was an entitled woman who believed that she was entitled to anything she wanted, whenever she wanted it. At first, I didn't mind Karen using my pool occasionally, but soon it became a daily occurrence. Karen would show up with her 2 unruly children, expecting me to supervise them while they splashed around in the pool. Her kids would break things, eat all my food, and leave a mess everywhere they went. I tried talking to Karen about it, but she just laughed it off and continued to use my pool without permission. Eventually, I had enough and told Karen that she and her children were no longer welcome to use my pool. Karen didn't take it well and began harassing me, showing up at my doorstep every day, demanding access to my pool. She even went as far as to sneak into my backyard when I wasn't home. It was clear that she wasn't going to give up easily. One morning I woke up to find that my house had been vandalized. The windows were broken and the walls were covered in graffiti. I knew instantly that Karen was behind it. She had gone too far this time, and I was determined to put a stop to her behavior. I called the police and filed a report, but Karen denied any involvement. The situation escalated, and I ended up having to take her to court. It was a stressful and expensive process, but in the end I won the case and was awarded damages for the repairs to my house.
Karen was forced to pay me a substantial amount of money, and she was also banned from coming within 500 feet of my property. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen wasn't one to give up easily. While I was away on a work trip, Karen hired an illegal contractor to chop down the beautiful oak tree in my backyard, hoping it would fall onto my pool and destroy it. I was devastated when I came back to find my tree gone and my pool damaged. I was angry, but I knew what I had to do. I took Karen back to court, and this time I wasn't holding back. I sued her for everything she was worth, and she was forced to declare bankruptcy. Karen lost everything, and everyone in the neighborhood knew what she had done. For a while, things were quiet. I thought that Karen had finally learned her lesson and would leave me alone. But one day, I received a package in the mail. It was a photo album filled with pictures of me and my family taken in our backyard. At first, I thought it was a gift from a friend, but then I noticed the note attached to it. It was from Karen, and the note read, "I'm watching you." I was terrified. I didn't know what to do or who to turn to. I called the police, but they said there was nothing they could do unless Karen threatened me directly. I lived in constant fear, never knowing when Karen was going to strike again. One night, I heard a loud banging on my front door. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was Karen or just some kids playing a prank, but the banging grew louder and more persistent, so I slowly made my way to the door. I peeked through the peephole and saw Karen standing outside, a wild look in her eyes. "Open up!" she screamed, pounding on the door. "I know you're in there!" I froze, not knowing what to do. I didn't want to let her in, but I also didn't want to provoke her any further. Before I could make a decision, the door suddenly burst open and Karen came charging inside. I stumbled backward, trying to get away from her, but she was too fast. She grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me, her fingers digging into my flesh. "You think you can just take what's mine?" she screamed, her face twisted with anger. "You think you're better than me? I'll show you who's boss." I tried to fight her off, but she was too strong. She pushed me to the ground and began kicking me, her feet connecting with my ribs and my stomach. I curled up in a ball, trying to protect myself, but the blows kept coming. It felt like it went on forever. But eventually Karen stopped and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I lay there for a long time, gasping for breath and trying to process what had just happened. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I couldn't live in fear anymore. I had to stand up to Karen and make sure she couldn't hurt me or anyone else ever again. I decided to hire a private investigator to look into Karen's background and find out what she was capable of. It was a risky move, but I knew I had to do something to protect myself. The investigator came back with some shocking information. Karen had a history of violence and had been arrested several times for assault and battery. She had also been diagnosed with a personality disorder that made her prone to erratic behavior and extreme mood swings. With this information in hand, I went back to court and filed for a restraining order against Karen. This time, the judge didn't hesitate to grant it, and Karen was forced to stay away from me and my property. She was also required to undergo psychiatric evaluation and attend anger management classes. I thought that was the end of it, but Karen wasn't done yet. A few months later, I received a call from one of my neighbors, informing me that Karen had been arrested for breaking into my house and stealing some of my belongings. She had apparently gone on a rampage, smashing things and screaming obscenities before the police arrived and took her away. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness when I heard the news. Part of me was glad that Karen was finally behind bars where she couldn't hurt anyone else. But another part of me felt sorry for her, knowing that she was clearly suffering from some serious mental health issues that had gone untreated for far too long. In the end, I decided to sell my house and move away from the neighborhood. I couldn't bear to stay in a place that held so many bad memories for me. But I also knew that I had learned a valuable lesson through this experience, that no matter how beautiful a house may be, it's the people who live in it that truly matter.
The next story is titled, Since We're Talking About Cutting in Line. When I was barely into my teens, I went to the fair with my dad and brother. There was a popular ride. We were in line and almost at the entrance. Some lady and her husband pushed their 2 sons in line in front of us. The poor kids were like, okay, and looked somewhat ashamed. So then, when they turn away, my dad tells us to walk in front of them. We did. Then we could hear the lady yell at her kids in Takahe, "Pay attention. They're stealing your spot in line." My dad said, "What's wrong with her? I can't believe she wants to raise her kids like that." And we kept going. The kids knew that what they did was wrong. The dad was just lost in oblivion, and the mom was mad.
The next story is titled, I Destroyed My Family Friend's Business and Credibility. The background. A few years after I started university, a friend of my mother's, who we will call Cook, started what can be generously called a restaurant in a small town a couple hours outside of the city we lived in. It was really a glorified hot dog stand and a golf course. My mother had invested money into the business, so she had a small personal stake in ensuring its success. That meant that she would often enlist us, aka my brother and I, to wait her when she could not do it herself. And my brother hated this guy. Though I don't blame him. Cook had no idea how to run a business, and he was completely uninterested in learning. He was also completely computer illiterate, and had me set up the Google account for his business. And in order to get us to work in his business, he would pick one of us up from our home, drive us 2 hours or so out of town, and we were basically stuck there until we were driven back, due to the fact that neither of us had a driver's license. And since my brother had problems with this guy, legit concerns that were brushed off as him having a bad attitude, I was the one who more often than not had to spend 2 to 10 days at a time there, stuck in a barely livable house until I was laid back home. My mother was no better. C, manage a business at all. D, utilize my brother and I in the most effective way, considering my brother had already graduated from university, and I was working towards a double major in business. Furthermore, they were completely unprofessional. They would host shouting matches in Chinese for customers to hear, and the kitchen was filthy despite Cook's insistence that the kitchen was the cleanest place in a restaurant. Yeah, right. An ice rink was less slippery than the ground in there, and he would routinely touch cooked food after handling raw meat. And I distinctly remember sweeping up what I thought was a green bell pepper, only to realize it was a moldy onion ring. Even the stove area was dripping grease. Literally, a big-ass drop landed on my arm one time. They could not train staff at all. They had hired 5 people in the first year, and none of them came back the next. Cook, in particular, was especially two-faced in how he handled customers. He would smile at them and greet them, remembering details from previous conversations, and then turn to me and say in Chinese about how they're all stupid, stingy retirees with too much money and free time on their hands. All this left a great feeling of resentment for both me and my brother. Not only was it effectively trapping us to work for this completely incompetent individual, we would get basically nothing out of it. This was particularly frustrating for me because, as a business student at the time, I could see all the ways the place could improve. I even offered to write up some policies, do some inventory management, and take a look at the administrative side just to help out and get some experience for myself. They kept insisting that they didn't need it. Sure, we were paid bare minimum and the guy did know how to cook, but we have to bear with the brunt of their frustration while hiding the fact that we were sick of helping out. Until we couldn't anymore. The incident. Last year, I graduated from university. It wasn't as happy of a time as it should have been because my grandpa passed away the week before. I couldn't even celebrate the night before I walked the stage because A, I had to give part of the eulogy the previous day, and B, I had to mediate an incident between my brother, my mother, and Cook because my mother couldn't. No pre-graduation shots for me because I was stuck on the phone for 3 hours listening to how insensitive Cook was over the fact that my grandpa just passed away. But I figured that once I walked the stage and I had my diploma, I could spend that next week job hunting. No dice. Immediately after I graduated on the Monday afterwards, my mother voluntold me that I had to work 10 days in the Hellstraunt. I lasted 6 before it happened. By all accounts, it wasn't that busy of a day to start off with. There was a breakfast brunch for Father's Day that barely anyone attended, and most people that did show up wanted to order off the menu. But both Cook and my mother were incredibly stressed out, and both of them were taking it out on me. My mother spent the day micromanaging me and finding flaws in every little thing I did, like cleaning an empty table over clearing plates from a table out on the deck, to not immediately refilling coffee or water when a glass or mug was half full, to not table touching every 5 minutes. Cook just shouted a lot and gave contradictory orders every 2 minutes. But it was the combination of my mother and Cook screaming at me for a mistake I didn't even make, something about a sauce that a customer requested but they got mad about, refusing to listen to me, literally shutting me down when I opened my mouth, and Cook mocking me for breaking down in tears. I remember him saying, "You're 25, you should know better than to cry over a stupid mistake," made me realize that not only could I not handle it anymore, but I wanted to burn the place to the ground. I booked a flight out of the province that day and left a week later. I didn't even tell my mother when or why I left. The revenge. Remember how I said that not only were they completely unprofessional, but also completely computer illiterate? See, despite the fact that I was no longer in the province, I still had all the login information for the business. Furthermore, because I knew all the laws that he blatantly refused to learn, I knew all the violations that he had committed in the business. For the first part of my revenge, I signed out his computer from the Google account. I don't think it was really necessary since he never used that computer in the first place for anything other than porn, but I want to make sure that he and my mother wouldn't be able to stop me. Before I left the province, I claimed the business in review sites using the email and the business phone number. Then, I blasted every single review, positive or negative, with all the crap he used to say about customers. Any negative review was immediately mocked. Any positive review was left with a note of "thank you, you cheap bee." Any questions were met with hostility, and it basically boiled down to "I'm right, you're wrong." I also make mentions about how he didn't wash his hands in the kitchen, and the stuff they're yelling in Chinese are insults about uppity customers. Given that it was a tourist-based town, I'm fairly certain that deep dip of sales that my brother mentioned later on was because of all those. And no one suspected a thing because my mother and cook didn't know how to work the internets, and my brother didn't care enough to look up the business. Next, I meticulously documented all the complaints that I had between my brother and myself, as well as the ones from the few people Cook had hired but never kept because he could not train them. I reported the 2 times that I slipped in his kitchen, incidents where he refused to wash his hands in between handling salad and raw meat because it took too long, and I handed those off to the Health Services Department. I also anonymously informed the Tax Revenue Agency that he was severely underreporting income as employees were instructed only to write down the credit-debit receipts to report in sales. The third part of my revenge wasn't really my part, to be honest. Rather, it was because of his own incompetence. As I said before, he was completely computer illiterate. I didn't even have to lock out the person he hired to do accounting because he didn't bother reporting his expenses except hand them a garbage bag full of receipts. To be honest, I felt kinda sorry for them, but because their hands were tied, they couldn't dispute any of the claims that I made. What I did do, however, was text them all the things that my mother and cook said about them so that they wouldn't bother trying to defend his ass. They quit a month before the crap hit the fan, meaning that Cook was left holding the bag. So naturally, given that the business wasn't making near as much money to make rent, let alone pay off all the fines that he was slapped down with, the government repossessed everything. From everything in the dinky little house that he was renting for business purposes to every single fork and knife he bought. Because of all the health code violations, he couldn't find a job as a cook again, which was his only job for about 30 years. And because the Tax Revenue Agency knew how bad he was with managing businesses, they naturally denied him when he requested a permit to open up a growing operation. As far as I know, he's no longer in contact with my family, but his brother-in-law, who is my mom's hairstylist, mentioned that he had to move somewhere else to get away from all the bad reputation. My mother mostly got off scot-free because all of the business permits and licenses were under his name, but she lost quite a lot of money, and last I heard, my family had to move into a smaller house. And no one knew that I was the one who was doing it. My brother suspected, as he relayed details of what had happened to me, but I never confirmed it. Not that he would tell my parents, because honestly, duck that hellstrom. As for me, I'd like to say that everything's sunshine and roses, but my decision to impulsively move provinces had its ups and downs. I did manage to find a place to live and a place to work, so at least I'm alive. It's hard, but I'd rather be doing this than going back. The next story is titled, "Wanna Have Parties While I'm Away?" Guess you get what you get. So, this was back in 2007, 2008 or so. I'd been living in an apartment with a roommate that turned out to be a raging alcoholic. Things mostly weren't bad, and we both had friends over and couch surfers and the like. Well, our apartment wasn't in the greatest of shape. Some airsoft divots in the walls from a few a-hole friends, carpets stained and dirty, but they were old when we moved in, etc. But nothing that wasn't repairable. It comes to move out, we have a few weeks left, and I'm at the apartment maybe 3 or 4 days out of the week and spending the others at my grandparents' house. I got sent to work at a secondary work location, and that made more sense than driving 45 minutes each way. So, in my time at the apartment, I'm spending time packing everything I own into my little 90s Mazda Protege, getting ready to move to AZ and dealing with vacation time and transferring outside my district for work. On top of all that, I'm spending a ton of time cleaning, patching holes, etc. I leave for a few days and come back to an empty apartment. There are bags full of empty bottles and cans in the kitchen, nearly waist deep, and a beautiful hole punched in the wall near the bathroom stuffed with bendy straws. So I take care of all that, get the stuff to patch the hole, and then leave for a few more days of work knowing that I would have to be back for the walkthrough inspection. The day after my last work day, I had messaged my roommate and told him he needed to get color match paint and paint over the repairs that I did to the hole, and he didn't do it. So I show up at the apartment with a couple hours to go until the walkthrough in order to polish up on any little things, only to find he never painted the one thing I asked him to do, and it's not done. So, I run to Ace, get the paint over, and open all the windows so the smell can dissipate. Then, the walkthrough happens, and they say that they can smell the fresh paint, but can't tell where it is, so I must have done one heck of a repair job. Damn right. Cue petty revenge. When we got the deposit back, it was sent to me, and since I had to spend so much time and effort cleaning and repairing the apartment and didn't get any help in return, I instead told my roommate that they charged us for the carpets and pocketed that money instead. Wasn't a lot of money, probably about half what I would have been paid as a handyman doing the same repair work. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.